Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me start by saying what an honor it is to be here today, standing on the right side of history, alongside everyone here today, to share with exceptional citizens from across the Arabian Peninsula their dream of energetic and self-governing societies they truly deserve. A clarification is due, however. I'm not a Gulf specialist, just in case. As a journalist, I covered OPEC, and as an academic, a professor of Islamic and Middle East history, my focus on law, Muslim rule-making to be exact. In this spirit of ensuring accuracy, clarity, of striving to rid this all too important region from misrepresentations, along with corrupt political legacies, today, in this session, which focuses on politics, we are privileged to have a diverse panel of real, genuine experts on the Gulf. Besides the diverse expertise of our panelists, we also have for you an eclectic format, alternating between dialogue and monologues, in way of providing variety and spaces to reflect in this session. So, to start with, from Kuwait, Dr. Sheikha bin Jassim offers her comments in a short clip. Dr. bin Jassim is an assistant professor of philosophy at Kuwait University. She's also a columnist in Al-Qabas, one of Kuwait's key dailies, as well as she writes for the Gulf House publication. So here we go.
Hopefully we should be on a video. I guess we should read it. Yeah, let's start.
As soon as the video is ready, we'll bring it to you. But let's start our discussion session, which is designed to generate more dialogues, hopefully with you, and dig deep and wide into power relations. Our first expert, Dr. Mark Valery, is the author of much praised Oman Politics and Society in the Qaboos State. He is an associate professor in political economy of the Middle East at the University of Exeter, as well as director of its Center for Gulf Studies. The most elusive of Gulf states, Oman is an excellent place to start a discussion on politics in the Gulf. So let me start at the very beginning, Dr. Valery. If you could just give us a brief summary of the foundation of modern Oman. A lot of people here really don't know how elusive this state is.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me here. I would like to, Oman has been probably it's traditionally viewed as the best friend of the UK in the Arabian Peninsula, and that's a long tradition of British involvement in Oman. Until now, that's one of the countries where the British are the most involved within the security services and within the intelligence. And Qaboos is the Sultan, the current Sultan, is probably the closest. He's Anglophile much more than Americanophile, and the relationship with the UK is one of the closest until now between the UK and the Gulf countries, with probably Bahrain. The Oman got the independence in 1970, and since then Qaboos has been ruling the country. That's one of the most personalized and most centralized monarchies in the region, because the Sultan holds the title. There is no prime minister. He holds the title of prime minister, and there is no. All main cabinet positions, including foreign affairs, defense, and for finance, are in fact all held by ministers in charge of it. But he's officially the one with controlling these cabinet positions, in addition to being the head of the armed forces, the head of the central bank. So that's an extremely centralized monarchy, which is probably, as Professor Michael Herb from Georgia State University in the US explained, Oman is not ruled by a ruling family, it's ruled by one person, Sultan Qaboos, and there are plenty of challenges ahead about the succession at the moment.
Thank you very much. You sound like a British. Sorry. You said that he's been there since 1970s. It's the British who put him. Am I correct?
Definitely.
Ever since is this the beginning of the nation state of Oman, you think?
Just on your question, he came to power during the Dhofar War, which was a very important war in the region at the time, because that happened at the time when Britain was officially withdrawing from east of Suez in 1967, but they were extremely active on the ground to support the father of Sultan Qaboos in his fight against the Dhofar revolutionaries at the time. And there was, by the beginning of 1970, the year 1970, basically the situation was becoming out of control in the southern province of Oman, in Dhofar. The British and the Sultan's armed forces controlled only a few pockets around the main towns, Salalah. So what the British decided is basically to make a coup and to overthrow the father and to put his son on the throne. And basically, Qaboos came to power. He was 29 at the time. He had absolutely no experience of rule of anything. He had been under house arrest by his father for 4 years after he came back from the UK after his study. And so he was put in place, and he was considered by many experts in the world as really the puppet for the British. And what is interesting is that he also, with the time passing, he managed to marginalize all the members of the ruling family, to establish a cult of personality around his power, centralizing all positions around, in himself, creating this cult of personality, and establishing a national rhetoric around the fact that he's at the center of the renaissance of Oman after 1970, and making a link between the emergence of the oil rent, which appeared only at this time, at the end of the 60s, early 70s in Oman, his access to power, and the creation of a new Omani nation. So all these elements about oil rent, his person, and the Omani nation have been the basis of his strategy of legitimization within the country. And it has worked for probably 20 years until the end of the 90s and early 2000s, when economic difficulties are starting to be quite tough. At the moment in Oman, you have amazing figures about unemployment in the country among the youth population. The International Labour Organization talk about 48% of unemployment among the 15-24, the youth from 15 to 24. The economic situation is very tough, and all this official narrative is becoming more and more challenged by Omanis on the ground. And that's really interesting, because in 2011, during the Arab Spring and the protests taking place in Oman, nobody expected that. And the regime, what is really interesting is that the regime is considered one of the most competent in terms of security and intelligence, with the Jordanian support, the British support, the Egyptian support, and they could not anticipate at all the protests taking place, which also shows how we as experts, but also as policymakers, we tend to overestimate a lot the security services and the intelligence in these countries, while there are plenty of deficiencies and issues. But in the time of the protests in 2011, the young people in the street were in fact challenging the official narratives and the regime's policies, and even the Sultan for the first time, in the name of the future of Oman. So they were disconnecting, and that's very important, they were disconnecting the Omani nation from the ruler, and explaining that Oman will survive after Sultan Qaboos, so they wanted to know what was the Oman post-Qaboos. And that was a very, very important, critical disconnection between and shift from the official narrative, making the link between Qaboos and Oman. They were explaining, the youth on the ground were explaining, we want to know what Oman will be in the future, and we want to challenge your policies and what you have been making in terms of decision making in the name of Oman. And that's very, very important.
What you've just said raises many questions, actually. I don't know where to start, but let me start with, from your description, raises a question about the viability of the concept of nation state. In this case, at least, are there Western imposed structures in that region, or at least in the case of Oman?
I mean, that's, I think that's a difficult question in the sense that...
There's always been a community of Oman, community of Kuwait, community, but a nation state, because you did say that people recognize we're Omanis, the future of Oman is one thing, and this narrative is something completely different.
I think it's not totally different. I think what is important is that we saw in 2011 in protests in all these countries, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Oman, that people were in the street not in the name of their sect or their community, but they were in the street in the name of the country, in the name of their nation. The Bahrainis in the street had Bahraini flag. They had no religious flag. They had no community flag. They had Bahraini flags. The same in Oman. They were talking in the name of Oman as a nation, as a country. And Kuwait, it's the same. People were talking about Kuwaiti issues and what was happening in Kuwait. So I don't say that there is no transnational connection, but what I mean is that the nation state has acquired something, I mean, which is solid, and we can call them as something artificial or anything, but in the end, the Kuwaitis they are feeling and they are thinking as Kuwaitis for the future of Kuwait. Bahrain is the same. They are not thinking in terms of Shia or Sunni primarily. They are thinking in terms of Bahrain, of the future of Bahrain, and that's the same in Oman for what I know. So what is important is that in order to contradict this idea, you have what Madawi al-Rashid, professor at the LSE, has called the hyper-nationalism rhetoric from the leaders trying to emphasize a particular type of military aggressive nationalism that is portrayed by the rulers in order to solidify the unity behind themselves. But this narrative goes against the narrative by the population and the nationals, saying we are not happy necessarily with this hyper-nationalism that you are portraying. We want to design our own nation and our own social contract for the future. And I think what is really important is that we see particularly in Kuwait, but it's true elsewhere. For a long time we've had the idea that the oil rent was decided by the rulers, or the use of the oil rent was in the hand of the rulers and decided by the ruler and distributed to the population and spent according to discretionary decisions by the rulers. What is really important since 2011 and Kuwait, but in Oman also, that people have been saying the oil rent is not anymore something that the ruler controls and they distribute as they want. This is a national wealth, and this is something that we want to have a say on in terms of spending, in terms of use. And that's really, really something critical, saying that the oil rent is a national good, a national wealth, that as a nation we should decide what we want to do with it. And we don't agree anymore that the ruler has to decide by himself what he wants to do with it and redistribute it to calm down the population.
Sorry, this is me. You again, here there's 2 points you raised. One, and both about legitimacy. One is the accountability. Who owns the wealth of the nation? Who decide what happens to us? How to proceed from here? How to progress from here? But there's another point you've raised, and I can't let go, is this image that massive propaganda machinery raised about Oman, and if you don't mind me mentioning Oman, of a stable, dependable country, and therefore there is legitimacy. Stability itself is a reason for legitimacy. Look at other places, because one of the poorest excuses about democracy, it is a poor excuse. Democracy is a headache, they fight with each other. But look at, and unfortunately, even in other Arabic-speaking states, and I give you the example of Egypt, where I come from, the revolutionaries were praising Oman for stability. So can you touch on these 2 strands, the legitimacy, part of it accountability, and part of it stability, political stability?
I mean, Oman has been very good as a PR strategy to present itself as an oasis of stability and all these kind of things. They have been extremely successful at that. Successful because also there are huge PR companies that are working in that direction, supporting that, and there are of course countries like the UK, which has always been saying that Oman is a reliable partner, is a stable partner, and so on. The thing is that and that has been used very well by the regimes by saying, and I think Yahya mentioned that in the introduction session, explaining that the regimes have been using the fact that there is chaos around, there is chaos in Yemen, there is chaos in Iraq, there is chaos in other countries, in Libya. So as a citizen or as a national of a GCC country, I should be quiet. I should, even if I'm not fully happy with the situation, I should stay quiet, because if I start protesting, if I start complaining, I will transform my country into Iraq and into Yemen also. And the same situation also, I mean, feeding into it also is the rhetoric according to which that reforms are implemented at their own pace. Reforms are slow, but they are taking place. and we need to let this country go at their own pace. This is, if we think about that, it's an extremely culturalist and racist position. This is exactly the same rhetorics that were used in cables by the British or by the French under colonization to explain that Algeria doesn't need democracy. That was during the French occupation of Algeria and the French colonization of Algeria. The Algerians can't govern themselves. They are too backward, they are not organized, they are too tribal, or they are too conservative, I don't know what. And that's exactly the same rhetoric that is used again by the regimes themselves to say, look, I'm liberal, I would like to make some reforms, but in fact my society is too tribal, my society is too conservative. So better having me to control the situation for you for the interest of the West. And the West are buying into it. I mean, the UK, the French are always telling that, are always telling, we should talk to Sisi. I mean, Sisi has been making Egypt a stable country. Yeah. And when you start talking about Oman as an Egyptian, I can talk about Egypt as somebody interested in Oman, because they say the same about Oman. They say, look, Oman is a stable country and we should talk to Sultan Qaboos, we should support what he's doing. The truth is that the last Majlis al-Shura elections took place last month. The participation rate in Oman for the Majlis al-Shura elections was the lowest in the history of Oman since the implementation of the universal suffrage in 2003. That was the lowest participation. People are completely disillusioned about the Majlis al-Shura and about the participation in this. And one of the most important, there have been harassment and bullying of a number of prominent candidates. And one of them is very famous. She has been very important on the social media. She was harassed, and there were a lot of electoral fraud to make sure that she was not elected in the parliament. So I think we should go beyond this idea about stability versus chaos, or beyond the dichotomy between authoritarian rulers who are friends of the West against Islamist forces ruling this country and creating anarchy. This is a dichotomy that is fitting into the narratives of the regime. And what we saw in 2011 is that all this culturalist approach is completely wrong about the Middle East. You were plenty of the protests were led not by party, not by sex, not by community, but they were led by citizens and nationals who wanted dignity, freedom of expression, fight against corruption, fight against inequalities, as everywhere in the world. And the Middle East has been a model for protest in Chile, in Hong Kong, in Spain with the Indignados movements and so on. So we need to move beyond this idea about caring about stability against chaos, I think.
If we need to move from this idea, brings the question of or the intersection between Western governments' role in one part of it, and we, the intelligentsia in the West, and the media, indeed, where, of course, Western, as every government, have their viable interests. They should protect their interests. But how to assess their role beyond going through protecting their interests to something, from what you're saying, sounds more ominous, really, because all these images, all these propaganda was pushed, and in many ways, the question of stability and reliability of these people fighting the bad guys who would hurt us in the West. I don't think you made it up. Simon didn't make it up. Most of us didn't make it up. It's a Western government and authoritarian joint venture. So could we start about talking about the Western governments and how could it change? Because really they're storing bigger trouble for themselves.
I think probably Simon, as a professor of international relations, would be better on that.
We'll get to him.
Yeah.
Oh, do you want to jump in?
I mean, just one word. I mean, the thing is, I'm not a policymaker, but I really want to say that the Middle East has been experiencing structural changes at the moment in terms of demography, for instance. I mean, in terms of demography, we have to understand that, for instance, the fertility rate in the region, in all countries, and especially in the Gulf countries, has dropped dramatically within 20 to 30 years. So we went from, in Iran and in Saudi Arabia in the 1990, from a rate of 6 children per woman, basically, to less than 2 at the moment, within 30 years. In Saudi Arabia and Iran in particular, but we can see that the same in Qatar, in the UAE, in all the countries. I think Oman is at 2.5 children per woman at the moment. So these are massive demographic changes. We have societies where more than 50% of the population at the moment is under 25, and usually more than 50% are under 20. So the generations of people who are between 10 and 20 now in the Gulf monarchies are either not yet still at school, or either not. I mean, they are about to enter the job market. So the main challenges that, in terms of economic challenges that these countries will face, these regimes will face, are coming. They are not there yet in terms of integration, people on the labor market and so on. And with these young generations who are, as I said, usually maybe the only son or daughter of the family, or maybe there are only 2 kids. So they have a totally different perception of what the family is, of what the traditions are, and so on. So their views of the world are completely different. And in that sense, we are only, I think, at the beginning of fundamental changes. The Arab uprising is just a first step, but it will last for decades. And I will pass to Simon.
Thank you very, very much. Actually, it's a good place to turn to Dr. Simon Mabon, a senior lecturer in international relations at Lancaster University and director of the Richardson Institute. His focus is international political theory, which he applies to the Middle East region. His book, Saudi Arabia and Iran, Power and Rivalry in the Middle East, which was first published in 2015, has been republished many times over. It fills a very important gap in the field. And I understand he is the research fellow with one of our hosts, the Foreign Policy Center. I'd like to start actually with the question of identities, which I wanted to talk to you about as well. Like those of Gulf nation states, sectarianism, as somebody said earlier today, rightfully said, are a malleable category. Can we start by talking about this? But it is a favorite description of the Middle East, especially of the Gulf. How do you see it as a tool or a preferred tool for authoritarian regimes in the Gulf?
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting and important question. I'll just very quickly first thank Drury, Adam, Jawad, everyone at Salam for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be representing the Richardson Institute and continuing our collaboration, which for us is incredibly important given all the work you do. So thank you so much for all of your hard work. I think this is a really important question, and it speaks to a project that I'm working on at present, a Carnegie Corporation funded project called CEPAD. And what we're trying to do in ZEPAD is to reflect on the ways in which sectarianism has been constructed, instrumentally used, and deployed by authoritarian states, by regimes, by prominent actors across the Middle East, and how that has operated as a mechanism of control, essentially, ever since the formation of the contemporary state in the Middle East, dating back to the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the end of the League of Nations, the League of Nations, the Treaty of Versailles. And if we go back to that period of time, we can see that sectarian identities have been positioned within the biopolitical governance structures of the state, if you will, to borrow some terms from Michel Foucault, Giorgio Agamben. And if I may, I'll just quote Gertrude Bell, a prominent British, I don't really know how to describe her given her various different hats that she wore. Official, perhaps, is maybe the best and most ambiguous way of referring to her in the Middle East. And she was involved in the creation of the Iraqi state in the 1920s. And what she did was she was particularly concerned about the threat to stability posed by Shia groups across the south. And she, in her diary, she wrote about the perception that these Shia groups had strong links to Persia at the time, and she was worried that if the Shia groups were really located within the fabric of the state, then that would be a way in for Persia to erode the sovereign essence of the Iraqi state. So this isn't a new entity, this isn't a new idea that dates back to 2003. It dates back to the very establishment of the contemporary state in the Middle East. And if we look across the 20th century and into the 21st century, you'll see that identities have been deployed, mobilized, manipulated at the whim of sovereign states, at the whim of rulers and the powerful. And I guess that the resonance of this demonstrates the power of religious identities, the stickiness of these religious identities, that they have the capacity to mobilize, they have the capacity to speak to broad concerns. They're not just purely instrumental, they actually resonate across society, but they have been deployed and mobilized and manipulated by the powerful in an attempt to ensure the survival of these particular regimes. And this isn't a new thing. This isn't a new phenomenon dating back to 2011 in the Arab uprisings, but it dates back all the way to the 1920s, and you can see this in the archival documents.
But here, you've just raised the question of sovereignty. How sovereign it is, any of these states, if the narrative around them has been constructed by Western officials, as you called it, or operatives, or however you want to call them. And
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I've just finished a book that explores this idea of sovereignty, and it's a fundamental question in political theory. How do you understand the roots of sovereignty? And if we look at the Weberian model, you can see that there are common features of a sovereign state, the idea that you have a bureaucracy that can collect taxes, you will have institutional mechanisms, the ruling elite will have a legitimate monopoly on the use of force. So there's these features that would be identified as being the prominent features of a sovereign state, and that's embedded within international politics, the United Nations, etc., etc. But if we look at the actual source of sovereign power and legitimacy, the point about legitimacy I think were really important, we'll see that there are different sources of legitimacy across the Middle East, across the Gulf. And if you look at the Saudi constitution, you'll see that God is the source of all of its laws. I mean, Saudi doesn't have a formal constitution, it has a basic law. But God is the source of that. God is sovereign, right? But the king is also sovereign because the king can suspend the basic law in times of crisis. So there's a tension there. But I think if we look at the fundamental features of what is typically accepted to be a sovereign state, you can see that there are these institutional dimensions. The Weberian model applies, broadly speaking, across the Middle East. But when we go deeper into what that Weberian model is filled with, then we get these real sort of differences, religious, cultural, political, tribal differences that offer a rich tapestry for understanding sovereign power, contingent on time and space.
But since you mentioned some of... Did you want to say something? Of course.
It was just a reminder.
God. Terrible, huh? Since you mentioned the literature on identities, this is a book by Amin Maalouf, is usually, he's a Christian, Lebanese and French citizen, that my Gulf students at Georgetown find especially to their liking. So, although, and he argues that nobody has one identity. There must be very narrow human being who has one identity, and therefore, can you imagine a situation where, when the umbilical, this neo-colonialist umbilical cord is severed, that the region would find new identities, just as it's looking for new ways to legitimize?
Yeah, of course, and I think what's going on in Lebanon and Iraq right now is a really good example of this. That in these two states, there's been this long-standing framing of events along sectarian lines, and they sort of hinted at it earlier on, but this was a manipulation of political life. But what people are trying to do in Lebanon and Iraq is say, "Khalas, we want something different. We don't want to be constrained by these long-standing identities around which the fabric of the state, the organizational structures of the state have been built." And you look at the political dimensions, at the power sharing dimensions, you look at the economic issues, you look at the basic governance structures of states, Lebanese state and the Iraqi state, and you'll see that the protesters are wanting something different. These protesters are explicitly articulating membership of anti-sectarian groups. They're explicitly articulating a desectarianization of political life. They're articulating being Lebanese and being proud of being Lebanese, being Iraqi, being proud of Iraqi, being anti-Iranian in some cases, because they're trying to move away from that very narrow understanding of identity. Now, the question is what comes next after that, and that's where new identities will be forged, interest-based identities, maybe political identities, class identities. All of these will come to the fore, and they will play out within the context of this reimagining of political life. And I imagine that this will also take place in other states across the region when the conditions are right for it. I mean, I'm thinking of Bahrain in 2011, and there was an opportunity for the reimagining of political life. And I remember the chants from the streets, I'm not Sunni, not Shia, just Bahraini. And it was that rejection again of sectarian narratives in favor of something more collective. And of course there would have been different identities that come out after that. But there was this moment of collective empowerment that was ultimately destroyed by the powerful who sought to decimate the collective moment and the collective movement by framing it in particular ways. And we all know the processes that happened there. But there was this moment of collective empowerment along particular lines that were rejecting the pigeonholing, this framing of events in very narrow sectarian ways. So yeah, there is this reimagining going on, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
You wrote a book about, which I've mentioned earlier, in which you looked very carefully at Saudi and Iranian political rivalries. And presumably there's systems of governments as well. Do you find the main basis on which both Saudis and Iran system base their government essentially identical, or do you see them different? Because you did mention something about Saudis have no system, you know, God is sovereign and all this, which from a Muslim point of view, I can tell you, we can argue a lot about that, about a governor who says, I rule in the name of God.
I look forward to that.
Yes, it's coming. So can you tell us about the differences between the two systems of their basis of legitimacy, and how entrenched each one, and how easy to dislodge both, either one of them?
I think that they're very different in the way that they operate, albeit perhaps aspiring to the same type of goal. They both aspire to claim leadership of the broader Islamic world. And in that sense, there are similarities, but the way that operates, I think, is dramatically different. The Saudi state is traditionally less democratic than the Iranian state, which has at least a facade of democracy in certain areas, albeit certainly constrained by a range of different forces. So there are different processes at play. The two aspire to claims to legitimacy in the same type of manner. They both aspire to this leadership of the collective community of Muslims across the world. But what is interesting is that very quickly after the revolution, the Iranians sought to frame the post-revolutionary Iran as speaking to all Muslims and oppressed Muslims, drawing on the legacy of Karbala, drawing on the legacy of Shiism, but not explicitly framing this as speaking to Shia Muslims. Because of the broader demographics, they wanted to speak to all Muslims, and the legacy of Shia thought, of course, features prominently. But what the Saudis did is they tried to reduce the claims to legitimacy that the Iranians were making by framing the revolutionary events as both Shia and Persian. In doing so, drawing on demographic differences and drawing on long-standing fears amongst many Arabs and indeed British, going back to Gertrude Bell, about the manipulation of political projects, about the loyalty of Shia communities, and about the legacy and historical legacy of Persians and Persian conquest. So it's the manipulation of events, and we see that playing out to this day. It's still a mechanism through which ruling elites try to play out.
Thank you very much. I have lots of questions, but we have to move now to Anwar. Ustad Anwar Rashid. Anwar Rashid or Al-Rashid? Al-Rashid. ليش كاتبينك رشيد؟ الأستاذ أنور الرشيد came from Kuwait, traveled from Kuwait, where he is the chairman of the Gulf Forum for Civil Society. I'll say it in Arabic as well. رئيس المنتدى الخليجي لمنظمات المجتمع المدني. He will give us a presentation, after which we hope to have more time to find out from him about the background of his group and his assessment of the most recent, indeed very exciting developments going on in the Gulf, including Kuwait. Please.
You guys want to come down? You might have to see
Thank you. I would like to speak Arabic because my lecture is very sensitive, and Mr. Jawad, he will translate it. أهلا وسهلا فيكم. أنا شاكر الحقيقة. أنا شاكر لكم على هذه الدعوة، وأنا سعيد بهذه الدعوة، وأنا من الناس اللي كنت أدعو من زمان أن يلتم هذا الجمع الخليجي لطرح رؤية للمعارضة الخليجية على المجتمع الدولي.
I'm happy to be with you today, and I'm delighted to be in this event. And I was looking for long time to be part of such events and to present with other GCC oppositions, NGOs, civil societies, such visions toward what's going on in the Gulf and for the future aspiration.
اولا ارحب فيكم في مدارك للاستشارات السياسيه والاستراتيجيه، وبالورود كالعاده نستقبلكم. هذا انور رشيد في سنه 66 يمكن اعتقد او 67. هذه من افضل او احب الصور الى نفسي. انا انور رشيد في الكويت، وكاتب صحفي من 97.
قرب الميكروفون انور. انور قرب الميكروفون.
خريج جامعة القاهرة سنة 81 بكالوريوس. كنت مدير المكتب الفني بأمانة المعلومات ودعم اتخاذ القرار بمجلس الوزراء الكويتي، ومستشار نائب رئيس الوزراء ورئيس مدارك الاستشارات السياسية. هذه الحقيقة لمحة بسيطة لأن البعض يعرفني والبعض ما يعرفني.
Just Anwar, he presented a short profile of himself with his photo when he was a kid in 1966. And I think details of his profile, you can find it in our websites, so I don't want to go through it details. Yes.
أنا قد نتفق كالعادة في طروحاتنا وقد لا نتفق، وأعتقد كوننا وجدنا، وهذا أمر طبيعي، كوننا إن وجدنا أو حضرنا في هذا اللقاء، أعتقد هذا بحد ذاته إنجاز كنت أطمح له من زمان.
So to agree or disagree, this is very, very natural, but to be here all together as activists or even politicians or human rights defenders and to look for the future of the Gulf or any vision toward aspiration of the Gulf, this is a really remarkable event and remarkable moments that we can share all together.
دائما أنا يعني أحب أطرح أسئلة وانتشارك في هذه الأسئلة ونبحث عن إجابة لها. دائما يعني نقول دائما من نحن كمعارضة خليجية متعددة الأطراف والمشارب، ولماذا نريد وكيف نحقق اللي نبيه أو اللي نريده.
Okay.
ومتى وأين نحقق ما نريده.
There are a few essential questions we have to raise. Who are we? What we want or what we demand, how we demand it, and when we have to raise it or demand it, and where we have to raise these demands, and so on. And definitely in what way.
من تقريبا أوائل عام 2019 عملنا دراستين مهمات جدا. دراسة تتعلق بالحريات في دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي، ودراسة لتحول الأسر الحاكمة الخليجية إلى ممالك دستورية. الدراسة عن الحريات في دول الخليج اللي عملناها والدراسة الأخرى اللي عن الممالك الدستورية وصلنا إلى نتيجة مهمة جدا. في دراسة الحريات.
خلنا بس. We carry on two important studies. The first one was about the general rights in GCC countries, and the second one on the visions toward having a constitutional monarchy within the GCC countries.
دراسة الحريات شارك فيها 1145 مشارك من دول الخليج، مقسمين على هذا التقسيم، ولا أريد أن أدخل في هذا التقسيم، يمكن تشوفونه، ولا الدراسة موجودة كاملة ممكن الاطلاع عليها والبحث فيها. هذه المشاركات كانت من كل دول الخليج حقيقة.
رجع محمد رجع السلايد. Okay, so the first study was about the general rights in the Gulf, and we had a sample of 1,145 citizens within all the GCC countries in this category, number-wise and the country-wise: Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, and UAE. And here is indicating that the percentage of the people within the sample who participated in this study.
خلاصة دراسة الحريات أو دراسة البحث اللي عملناه عن الحريات في دول الخليج دراسة يعني النتيجة كارثية الحقيقة يعني تخيلوا الآن تقريبا 80% لا يستطيعون إبداء رأيهم في دول الخليج. يعني 79 و88 من مواطني دول الخليج الذين شاركوا بهذه الدراسة يقولون بأننا لا نستطيع أن نتحدث دون أن يكون وراء حديثنا عواقب. وأريد أدلل بهذا الأمر، يعني حتى الكويت اللي كانت من الدول بعدين راح الكويت اللي كانت من دول تعتبر يعني من واحة وسط الصحراء قاحلة في الخليج، اليوم الكويت لديها أحكام على أصحاب الرأي قاربت 7 قرون، وهذا مسجل لدينا بالأسماء والأحكام.
The main and major conclusion of the studies over the general rights in the Gulf, you can see it here, almost 80% of this sample, they confirm that there are no rights, and at the same time there are fear of type of the harassment or punishment or targeting them at all. So they cannot express their idea freely at all. And even Kuwaiti, as example, where Kuwait had a little bit marginal freedom compared to the rest of the GCC, we can see Kuwait almost considered to be in the same level. As example, there are cases that some people expressed their views or just they made a tweet, and we can count like 7th century as imprisonment for these cases. That indicate that there is no such room for freedom or expressing your view within the GCC country.
أما بحث دول التحول إلى ممالك خليجية، هذا البحث أيضا مهم جدا اللي عملناه، وراح أمر على أيضا مرور سريع. شارك بها 778 مشارك مقسمين كالتالي. الملاحظ في الدراستين أن أكثر المشاركين كانوا كلهم من دولة الكويت، على اعتبار أن الكويت شوية فيها نوعا من الحرية نوعا ما، يعني لذلك دائما تصير المشاركات من الكويت أكبر، وأقل المشاركات طبعا أيضا من هذا. وهذا أعطانا مؤشر مهم جدا عن مدى الحريات في أي دولة خليجية على حدة.
The second major study, as I mentioned earlier, is about possibility that the GCC government to be converted to the constitutional monarchy. Our samples is within the range of 778 citizens, and as per percentage-wise and the number-wise of each country, you can see the majority of the samples are coming from Kuwait. 51%, almost 403 out of them are from Kuwait. And this is itself is give you some indication that little bit there are more room for freedom of expression in Kuwait compared to the others, where we could see that people are ready to participate in this study and express their view little bit freely or marginally compared to the rest of the GCC countries.
طبعا هالدراستين هذه كان بإشراف ومساعدة الدكتور بشار البقلي من جامعة سانت أندروز في اسكتلندا.
These two studies are being supervised by Dr. Bashar al-Bagli, and he was from what university?
سانت أندروز University.
St. Andrews University in Scotland, yes.
طبعا خلاصة البحثين المؤيدين لتحول دول الخليج أو الأسر الحاكمة الخليجية 80%، يعني 80% من المستفتين في دراسة تحول دول الخليج أو الممالك الدستورية إلى ممالك دستورية يعني مؤيدين لذلك 80% وشوية من مواطني مجلس التعاون الخليجي المستفتين.
The very remarkable conclusion of both these studies is this phrase that majority of 80.8% of Kuwait of GCC citizens, they are in favor of converting their countries toward constitutional monarchy, similar to the progressive constitutional monarchy in Europe. It is not just to convert it to constitutional monarchy, but to be as standard as the constitutional monarchy in Europe. And as we mentioned, and you can see percentage, very, very high percentage of those who participate in this study, 80%, they are in that favor and they are demanding that.
طبعا مثل ما ذكرت لكم يعني ايضا نسبه اللي يخشون من الحديث ايضا نسبه عاليه يعني تقارب ب 80%. النتيجه وما ود ان اوصل له من خلال استعراض بسيط لهذه البحثين ان هناك خوف شديد يعني وعالي المستوى لدى مواطني مجلس التعاون الخليجي بالتعبير عن نفسهم وعن ما يجول بخاطرهم، وايضا هناك رغبه شديده وعاليه المستوى بان يتحرروا. ذلك نسبه الذين طلبوا ان يكونوا ممالك دستوريه وصلت 80%.
So the percentage of almost 80% of those participating in those studies are really afraid to express their ideas or to have a free expressions. And the conclusion is there are a very high level of fear and there is a very high level of tension to express their ideas or their views. And they have a very strong feeling toward that the change should be there, the change toward the constitutional monarchy. So on one hand, there are so much fear, and on the other hand, so much strong, I can say, belief or the demand to have changes within their current condition.
طبعا لغة الأرقام لا يمكن دحضها، والبحثين كانوا بإشراف أكاديمي. لم يكن هالبحثين هما مجرد جمع آراء وتحليلها، وإنما كان أيضا وفق أسس علمية وقيم علمية.
We cannot ignore facts of the statistics. We cannot ignore the numbers and percentages. And it's been carried on by a neutral body and through the scientific method. So this will give us a clear vision of what's going on in the GCC within the majority of the citizens.
طبعا وسط هذا البحثين شلون نقدر نطلع أو نقفز إلى مرحلة جديدة.
So within these two studies, one hand there is a fear and there is restrictions on the freedom of expression, and on the other hand, so much willing toward the change toward constitutional monarchy. How we can try to find our way, how we can try to make our movement toward these challenges and toward this obstacle we are facing.
يعني من الامور اللي وصلنا لها ان هناك في رغبه جامحه لدى مواطني مجلس التعاون الخليجي بانهم يتخلصوا من هذا الواقع اللي هم فيه. وبذات الوقت خوف شديد من المستقبل. ما في يعني لم تطرح رؤيه او مشروع مستقبلي الى شعوب دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي. ودعوني بهذه العجاله يعني انا تابعت يعني دائما اتابع نشاط الاخوه الخليجيين وما اكثرهم لاجئين سياسيين هنا في لندن وفي كل اصقاع العالم حقيقه. وتابعت ايضا المؤتمر رائع جدا عملوه مجموعه المعارضه السعوديه اعتقد في فبراير الماضي يمكن. اسفت حقيقه وانا اتابع المؤتمر، لم يصدر عن المؤتمر حتى بيان يبين راي هذه المجموعه. واتصلت ببعض الزملاء يعني قلت لهم ما يصير، ما مؤتمر ما يطلع في رؤيه ولا تصور مش معقول. او ديسمبر يعني.
Okay.
ديسمبر.
Okay.
بعد سنه.
As I indicated earlier, there is strong, ambitious and strong feeling to try to change the current conditions, and we have to shift from the current circumstances to something or a different an environment that we are looking for. And at the same time, there are strong fear about what's going to be in future. There is a vague, because neither the governments and even maybe the NGOs up to now, they didn't given a clear visions toward what's going to be in future. And this is part of our responsibility that we have to carry on and to have to clarify it and emphasize with it. Recently, there was a conference being organized with some NGOs here in London, but I couldn't see their end statement of wrap up of that conference. I hope that such movement going to be in more organizational way that we can read the outcome of such events or conferences.
By the way, أي مواطن خليجي عندما يريد الحديث يضع هذه الصورة أمام عينه.
Any GCC city to speak, he will look at this hanging rope.
ما الهدف؟ هناك واقع وهناك تطلعات. هناك واقع خليجي وهناك رؤى وتطلعات. كيف نسيق هذه التطلعات؟ إذا أردنا أن تحسين واقعنا لمستقبل أفضل لابد من دراسة الواقع وإمكانياته.
If we're going to be realistic and we want to change the current conditions, and we have to know what's the condition we are living in, and definitely to go toward ambitious or futures, first of all, we have to find out the steps we are moving in and the ground we are working on. And then we can be more realistic when we are planning for the brighter future.
الواقع يؤكد بأن أي طرح بعيد عن الواقع نفسه لن يكون له النتائج كما نرقب.
Any visions is not considering the current conditions or environment or a different compartment of the current conditions. It will not lead to the sustainable or fruitful future as we need.
الواقع يقول لنا بأن هناك أسر حاكمة لن تتنازل عن ملكها طوعا، تأكيد يعني. وهناك تدخل دول العالم مرتبطة بهم مصالحهم.
There are two main facts are there, and we have to consider it as a currently. There are ruling family, never ever they want to give up their power by any means. In the same time, there are international superpowers which they have their own interests in that region. Definitely they will not give up their interests, and still they want to be involved or geopolitics of that region.
إذن ما العمل؟
What we should do?
لابد من البحث بشكل جدي لتطوير فكرة تحول أسر الحاكمة الخليجية إلى أسر مالكة. نظرية رابح أعتقد يجب علينا أن نفكر فيها.
So with the current conditions and two main factors which I mentioned, and we have to find out and to be serious to find out how we can develop our ideas, our visions toward shifting the current GCC ruling families to a constitutional monarchy to get the theory when and when.
وهذه أرضية رائعة جدا ممكن ننطلق منها طالما أن لدينا 80% من مواطني مجلس التعاون الخليجي يؤيدون هذه الفكرة.
So if we believe that 80% of the GCC citizens are demanding that or in favor of changing the governments or the regimes toward the constitutional monarchy. So we think that it is a very potential ground or strong ambitious there that we can shift toward this demand constitutional monarchy.
وبعد لابد من طرح مشروع مستقبلي لتلتف عليه حق الشعوب، يعني دون وجود رؤية فيجن طرح مستقبلي ما يعني صعب انك انت تكسب الرأي العام. بس لحظة شوية. الإشكالية المعارضة في كما أراها في دول الخليج كمجتمعة مش كفردية لم تطرح مشروع. يعني الجماعات الإسلامية بتصنيفاتها لديها مشروع عودة الخلافة، أما الجماعة المدنية ليس لديها مشروع، لم تطرح مشروع. يعني طرحت مشروع دولة مدنية لكن أين وكيف ومتى لم يطرح هذا الأمر.
Definitely we have to present our vision toward the future. We have to promote our vision within the GCC governments, and we, regardless of what background we are coming, definitely we have to prepare ourselves for opposition groups or different even NGOs, yet they collectively didn't forwarded any feasible visions which could be a practical solution to the current crisis. And different groups like Islamic groups or different groups, either they want the Khilafat states or Islamic states, which maybe won't be accommodating all the visions or different sects of the community within the Gulf. So, and those who are believing in the civil states, still they are so behind to promote their vision, or even they didn't collectively agreed on a common vision.
هذا يعطينا صورة عن الممالك الموجودة، الممالك الدستورية في العالم، يعني في كندا وفي انجلترا وفي دول اسكندنافية واستراليا بما فيها شرق آسيا. يعني.
This map is indicating that constitutional monarchy where is there in the world.
ينقصنا المشروع بالفعل ينقصنا.
The dark one.
ينقصنا المشروع يعني، لذلك لابد من طرح فكرة أو مشروع الدولة المدنية الدستورية.
Definitely we need such vision, or we need such proposal to go and adopt the state based on the constitutional monarchy, civil state based on the constitutional monarchy.
نعتقد بأن هذا المشروع سوف يحفظ حق الشعوب وأيضا الأسر الحاكمة كما هو حاصل في بريطانيا.
So we think with this proposal, constitutional monarchy, we can maintain the right of all citizens and all nations within that region, at the same time the rights of the ruling family.
هل نحن في هذا المؤتمر نلتقي لكي نفضفض نفشة خل ونمشي؟
Or we are here just to express and to express our feelings or our views, and that's it, say goodbye?
أنا أعتقد إذا كانت الإجابة بنعم فما في داعي نكمل هذا المؤتمر إذا ما طلعنا فيه بشيء.
So if the answer is going to be yes, and then it will not be that much fruitful or useful for the outcome of this conference.
خلاص دكتورة نروح نسمع الأخبار ونروح البيت.
So maybe it's better to listen to the daily news and go home.
إذا كانت الإجابة بلا فيتطلب منا أن نعمل.
So if the answer is no, then we have to start working and creating working group and to be considering it as a project and continuous plan for that project.
لتحقيق هذا الهدف لابد من أن علينا أن نكون على يعني ثقافة من ثقافة العمل الجماعي. راح استعجل شوية. علينا أن نطرح مشروع الممالك الدستورية كخيار مستقبلي يبشر بمستقبل أكثر أمنا للأسر الحاكمة الخليجية وأيضا إلى شعوب المنطقة وأيضا إلى الأمن والسلم العالمي أيضا.
So we have first of all believe in a group work, and at the same time we have to consider or adopt constitutional monarchy as a future vision or aspiration, and that's definitely will lead to the more security and stability of the region and all those concerned about this strategical location part of the world.
لابد من حوار مجتمعي. خلونا نطرح هذه المشروع وهذه الفكرة على المجتمعات الخليجية أيضا والمجتمع الدولي، بأن شعوب الخليج ترغب بأن يكون هناك في أسر حاكمة دستورية أو ممالك دستورية خليجية.
We have to open the channel through the dialogue within different sects of the society and try to lead them to have contacts and discussion among themselves about this proposal.
وأتمنى أن نطلع من هذا المؤتمر بمجموعة خليجية تعمل على أمرين. الأمر الأول هو إقناع الرأي العام أو كسب الرأي العام الخليجي المهيئ أساساً، والذي 80% منه مهيئ لأن يتقبل فكرة الممالك الدستورية بسرعة.
So we have to work on to organize ourselves as a group and then try to convince the public opinion internationally, in the same time in GCC, first of all to consider such proposal as a practical project, and we can follow it up and try to implement it gradually. تنهي شوي عشان وقتنا.
يعني اقترح ان ينبثق ايضا من هالمجموعه هذه تقنع تتواصل مع الراي العام الدولي الامريكي والاوروبي في هذه الفكره بسرعه.
I propose that out of this conference we can agree on a committee that they can start their work to try to promote these visions and try to work on it regionally and internationally.
طبعا انا بحكم متابعتي انا مدرك انه في الم خليجي، لان الشعوب الخليجيه في الم خليجي، والالم هذا الخليجي متمثل في الكثير من السجون والاحكام واللاجئين السياسيين.
Because I'm coming from that region, I can feel and there are a fear within the citizens there and all the communities, and because there are oppression and there are detentions, there are targeting there, and there is banning of any type of human rights.
يعني حتى انا ما اعرف يعني اذا رديت الكويت شنو بيصير فيني بعد الاستعراض هذا.
Even I don't know what's going to be happening to me if I go back to Kuwait after this conference.
امامنا نظريتين الحقيقه، اما نظريه مانديلا او يعني لتحقيق هذا الهدف، او نظريه خاسر ما امامنا يعني خيار اخر، ولا نريد ان نخسر لا الامن ولا الاستقرار ولا اي شيء.
To achieve that ambitious toward the constitutional monarchy, we have just two theories. There is no third one. Either to adopt the theory of Nelson Mandela, that means peaceful movement, or to adopt the lose-lose method, which is going to be definitely lead to the destruction and no one will win.
فأي من الطريقين نختار يعني، أي من الطريقين نختار يعني، هذا الأمر أتركه لكم، وأترك هذا يعني لكم لتجدوا له إجابة يعني مش منك يعني. وكما استقبلتكم بالزهور وودعكم بالزهور، وأنا آسف على الإطالة، وكان يعني حبيت أن أتكلم بالعربي عشان أكون أكثر دقة بما أعبر عنه. وشكرا.
Thank you very much, and I leave the answer to you. And like I started with giving you the roses, I will end up giving you roses. And thank you very much.
أي سؤال؟ Any question?
I think for everyone, yeah? Okay. Can we invite the speakers back up? The good news is that lunch has arrived. But 10 minutes-ish, we're going to let you have your thoughts and questions, clarifications.
Are we doing the questions now?
Yes, yeah, we're going straight to question.
Okay, this is the fun part, but to get as many voices as possible, which is really the reason we're here, please put whatever comment, and comments are welcomed as well, or question, 1 minute on it only. Thank you very much. The lady there.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid. Very enlightening and very actual and realistic, whatever you put there. One comment only. I think Mr. Nelson Mandela, he had to go through stages during his, movement. It wasn't a total win-win situation. It was a lost-win situation, and then win-loss situation, then the win-win situation. And we have to accept this. We cannot go, according to whatever we have. We have to pass through these stages. We have to be realistic. We will lose at a certain stage. Governments will win. Certain stage, we might win, and the governments might lose. And by the end...
Okay, is that the point? Thank you very, very much. You've been very kind. Yes, sir.
My question is to Mark. You talked about Oman. There is this idea that the UAE is putting a lot of pressure on Oman, and then Oman has, in fact, is going through difficult times. There's even the talk of that the next Sultan of Oman could be changed subject to the UAE pressure. They want to have a person who would be able. So are you really, are you following that? Because this is something very important, and the Omani authorities keep talking about jobs and stuff like that in order, to
So you're interested in succession. Okay, because we were supposed to cover that. Next, we'll take 3 questions and go. Yes, sir.
So my question is to Mr. Rashid. So I don't know if this is more of a question or an assessment, but one of the main frustrations I had with the presentation is sort of the lack of any explanation as to the methodology that was employed to get those statistics. And I think
fair enough. Thank you very much.
I didn't ask the question.
Let's start with Mark. To get rid of the succession in Oman. هترجم لك.
أتمنى إن لو نعرف أزيد عن طريقة
يقول لك ما في منهجية في هذا. Let's start with the succession. Do you want to do the succession? Anybody? You want to do the succession?
Yeah, I think that's a major question, and the thing is, it's not a recent one, because many Omanis in the street have been worried about what would be, that there is no plan for succession, at least what we know, at least. The thing is that the UAE the Oman-UAE relations have been quite difficult, and not to say more than that, since the death of Sheikh Zayed, of course before also, but since the beginning of the 2000, for 15 years, there have been a lot of problems. The border, as you know, is almost closed between the two countries, so it's extremely difficult to cross the border. There are issues about the fact that, of course, Oman considers the UAE as a threat, with the fact that the UAE has more and more presence in South Yemen. They are present in Socotra. They have a view about Musandam, and there are issues about the role of the UAE in Musandam too. So for Oman, the relation with the UAE, and for the UAE, the relation with Oman is extremely difficult. One of the main actors, I think, for the succession, we should not forget it, is the UK. The UK has a role in that, and they want to have a role in it. After 2011 and 12, when there were these protests in the street and so on, and when protesters started to talk about the Sultan and to call the Sultan directly, and not anymore talking about the cabinet members, they were talking to the Sultan in the street. The UK has been pushing the Sultan to appoint a prime minister. They have been pushing very strongly by saying to him, you have to appoint somebody as a prime minister. He will act as a safety valve or as a fuse for you. He will attract all attention and all protests and grievances from the population, and you will remain the kind of father of the nation, and you will make the transition smoothly, and you will remain in the history as the father of the nation. He has said no, clearly no, to Alan Duncan, who was the special envoy of the UK to Oman. And so the UK has and wants to have an involvement in that, and that's another actor. The UAE definitely, Mohammed bin Zayed wants to have a role in that, but Mohammed bin Zayed, I think, he's considering that whatever the next Sultan will be, he will be so weak in terms of legitimacy and in terms of economic situation that he will have to rely in one or another on Abu Dhabi's money and on the UAE. So Mohammed bin Zayed probably doesn't want to appoint somebody or to doesn't necessarily have his own candidate at the moment, but he knows or he thinks that in any case Oman will be weak and will be in the situation to have to rely on UAE money in the future.
Thanks very much. You wanted to answer him?
Yes.
There's two questions for Ustad Anwar. One concerning the methodology of the bin Zayed, and the other is that it is civil rights is a win, lose, win, lose. It's an evolutionary process. It's not something we could.
شكرا. ممكن استاذ جاسم تترجم الكلام اللي بقوله لاهميته. بالنسبه لي بالنسبه لسؤالك استاذه، يعني هي قضيه الوين وين واللوز لوز. يعني احنا نعتقد بان بعد النتيجه هذه اللي سويناها في البحث والدراسه، ما امامنا الا ان وين وين، لا نريد ان نخسر. المواطن الخليجي في بحبوحه، وطبعا مش كلهم اللي في بحبوحه، لا معناها بتقديري لا يتجاوز 30% يعني في من دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي. وبالتالي انا اعتقد الوين وين هي النظريه التي يجب ان نتبعها يعني، وما امامنا خيار اخر. قضيه العنف ومحاوله تغيير بالعنف هذه اعتقد خاسره. اما بالنسبه للمنهجيه يعني
Can I get that one? Yeah. Well, you know what Anwar is saying is that there is no substitute to the win-win formula. That's the only viable option that we have. Certainly, there is no point to go for violence. Violence can really destroy the nation. And that what we have to do is just sustain the work of peace and peaceful measures, and hopefully we can achieve some success.
أما بالنسبة للمنهجية يعني ممكن تطلع على الدراستين موجودة هي في موقع تويتر في مدارك للاستشارات السياسية والاستراتيجية، موجودة الدراستين ممكن تطلع عليهم. وجدا مهم أيضا الكل يطلع على هاي الدراستين، يعني ليس دعاية لمدارك الاستشارات وانما للاستفاده. يعني احنا عملنا هالدراستين بتكاليف، تحملنا تكاليفها على مدى اكثر من 4 شهور للاعداد وهذه، ونشرناها ليطلع عليها المجتمع المحلي. وهي مثل ما قلت يعني باشراف الدكتور بشار البغلي يعني في جامعه سانت اندروز في اسكتلندا.
Yeah, well, just talking about the methodology that, there is a website to go for. You mentioned the website, this is the Madarik, for consultancy. It took about 4 months to gather the data and under supervision of a well-known academic at university. So he says there is a space for that to go and check, and he encourages people to go and visit the website.
I would have loved to hear everybody, and I hope we'll talk, but I was given instructions by the organizers that the final question is for their very, very own, the wonderful Yahya Al-Asi.
Thank you. And it's not questions, just very small comments about the Saudi Dissidents Conference. Anwar, he criticized that and he said there is no outcome. For us, I believe there's lots of work is going on. Anwar also, he asked to do some work and to fight with the repression and to ask to tell the world what's our messages. I think there is massive work, and we can't blame people that are fighting the regimes, because the regimes, they are very, very powerful, and they have allies, they're supporting them all around the world. So we need to be more realistic than optimistic. Regarding to our conference, we did the conference for several times. Yes, there is no clear outcome, because the first time for people like Saudi people to come together, to talk together, and to deal with each other, while the regime for decades keep dividing people. At the moment, I feel it's real success. They gather together, and the next success, hopefully, we'll publish something soon. Thank you.
Alas, we must end here. Thank you very much. Before we do, I must thank our experts for their most stimulating presentations, and most of all, thank each and every one of you who attended this session, and indeed the organizers who chose to stand up for reforms that allow the peoples across the Arabian Peninsula and the world to see their creativity and potential that can only require the oxygen of freedom. Thank you very much.